Montana Territory, late spring of 1879. The wind carried the scent of pine and rain over the Gallatin Range as thunderheads rolled low above the peaks. Travis Vance's horse kicked up wet earth as he rode hard through the valley, heart pounding like hooves against rock. He had not slept in 2 nights. The telegram in his coat pocket was crumpled and damp from sweat, but he knew every word by memory. Bride missing. Eastbound stage ambushed. Last seen near Elk River. Please hurry. He did not need to read the name. He already knew who it was. Evelyn Oakley. Travis leaned low over the saddle, urging his bay mare faster. Evelyn had been promised to another man, a banker out of St. Louis, but something in her letter to his sister 2 weeks ago told a different story. She had written about fear, about cold feet and colder intentions. She wrote about wishing she had made different choices. And Evelyn had always been honest. He had not seen her in 3 years, not since her father moved the family east. But Travis had never forgotten her. They were 18 the last time they spoke, standing beneath the cottonwoods behind her father's barn. She kissed him once, soft and trembling. Then she left. Now she was lost in the wilds of Montana. He reached Elk River by dusk. The town was barely more than a mill, a saloon, and a general store. The sheriff, a grizzled man with a limp and a rifle longer than his arm, met him outside the jail. "You Travis Vance?" the sheriff asked. "Yes," Travis said, dismounting fast. "The woman from the stage, Evelyn Oakley. Where is she?" The sheriff sighed. "Stage was hit by 2 drunks with rifles. Meant to rob it, ended up spooking the driver. Coach rolled. We got 1 man dead, 2 passengers beat up pretty bad. But the lady you're looking for, she ran off into the trees. That was 2 days ago." "She was alone?" Travis asked, voice sharp. "Best we know." But listen, Travis was already back on his horse. He rode north toward the thick woods along the river. The land was slick and the light fading, but he searched until night swallowed the hills. He made camp under a cedar and rested only long enough to eat a dry biscuit and pour rainwater into a tin cup. Then he was riding again by dawn. On the 2nd day, he found a scrap of blue ribbon tied to a branch. He knew it. Remembered it from years ago. Evelyn always wore her hair back with that ribbon. His chest tightened. She was alive. By midday, he spotted smoke rising through the trees. He dismounted quietly and moved uphill on foot. He found her near a rock overhang, barefoot and shivering beside a weak fire. Her dress was torn at the sleeve, her face scratched, but her eyes, those steady, dark eyes, met his calmly. "Travis," she whispered. He walked straight to her and dropped to his knees. "Are you hurt?" "Not bad." Her voice cracked. I thought I heard something last night. I tried to stay near the river, but I lost the trail." "You did good," he said, checking her ankle. It was swollen, but not broken. "You kept the fire going. That probably kept the cats away." She gave a small nod, then her lip trembled. "I did not know who else would come." Travis helped her sit back against the rock. "You knew I would." He wrapped his coat around her, then built the fire stronger. She leaned into him without asking, and he let her. Her head rested near his shoulder, her breath warm through the fabric of his shirt. "I was not going to marry him," she said quietly. "The banker. I got to the station, and I could not do it." "You ran." "I ran," she said. "I sent that telegram to your sister, hoping maybe she would tell you." "She did," Travis said. "You left the stage before it was safe, Evie. You could have died. I would rather that than live cold beside a man I do not love." He looked down at her. She had dirt on her cheek and a bruise beneath one eye, but to him she had never looked more beautiful. "I will take you back," he said. "We will get you fed and warm. Then we will figure out the rest." "I already figured it out," she said, voice steady now. "I want to stay here with you." Travis stared at her, heart thudding so loud he thought she must hear it. "You are not saying that just because you are scared?" "No," she reached up, resting her fingers against his chest. "I was scared before. Not anymore." He pulled her closer, hand behind her head, and kissed her with every ounce of aching he had held onto over the years. Her hands trembled against his shirt, but she kissed him back with the same fire. They camped there that night, wrapped in his blanket beside the fire. She fell asleep with her head on his chest, and Travis stayed awake long enough to whisper, "You saved yourself, Evelyn. But you also saved me." Because somewhere between the trail and her voice in the dark, he realized the hole in him, one he had carried since she left, was finally whole again. And he was not letting her go. Not ever again. Evelyn stirred slowly, drawn from sleep by birdsong and the scent of damp pine. Her cheek rested against rough cotton, and the steady rhythm beneath her ear reminded her she wasn't alone. She eased upright, blinking against the pale morning light filtering through the trees. Travis was awake, sitting with his back against a log. His hat shaded his eyes, one hand resting on the rifle across his lap. "You didn't sleep," she said softly. His gaze flicked over to her. "Didn't want to miss anything moving through. There's prints near the creek, likely elk, but I wasn't taking chances." She pulled the coat tighter around her. "I used to think the forest was peaceful. Now it just feels like it's watching." "It is," he said. "But not all watching is bad. Some of it's just knowing you're there." She looked at him closely. His jaw was rough with stubble, and there was a new scratch along his neck. "You're bleeding." Snagged a branch coming up the ridge. "It's not deep." She reached forward, fingers brushing his skin. "Still, it needs cleaning." They packed what little they had and headed east along the river. Travis walked beside her, holding the reins loosely in one hand while she leaned on a branch he'd carved into a walking stick. The mud slowed them, but she didn't complain. Somewhere past the second ridge, they found a narrow trail cut into the hillside, likely used by trappers or surveyors. It led them toward a cabin nestled in a hollow where the trees broke open. Travis approached the door and knocked with the butt of his rifle. A thin woman with 2 braids and a broad scar across her cheek opened it, eyes wary. "We ain't selling," she said. "Don't want to buy," Travis replied. "We just need hot water and somewhere to sit a while." She sprained her ankle. The woman looked at Evelyn, then stepped aside. "Don't touch nothing but what I hand you." Inside, the cabin smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke. The woman, who introduced herself as Cora, pointed to a bench near the hearth. Evelyn sank down with a quiet sigh. Cora handed Travis a cloth and a tin basin. "Boil that water there. I'll get willow bark." While she worked, Travis crouched in front of Evelyn and dipped the cloth into the steaming water. He dabbed gently at the scrape along her temple, frowning at the faint bruising spreading down her jaw. "Were they looking for money?" he asked, voice low. "They thought I was alone," she said. "One of them said something about a dowry." He stopped moving. "Did they touch you?" "Only enough to knock me down," she said. "I kicked one and ran before they could decide who'd go first." He stood abruptly, walking toward the fire. His hands curled into fists at his sides. "I'm not afraid of them anymore," she said behind him. "That's past." He turned slowly. "You shouldn't have had to be brave like that." She gave him a long, steady look. "Neither should you." They left the cabin before noon, after Cora handed them a wrapped bundle dried venison and oatcakes. "Don't go west," she warned. "There's been noise in the hills. Army patrols, but they ain't always careful who they fire at." They headed south instead, following an old wagon path that curved through the valley. By mid-afternoon, they reached a cluster of abandoned homesteads. Travis led her to one with a roof mostly intact and broken shutters flapping in the breeze. "We'll stay here tonight," he said. She stepped across the threshold into the dust and silence. A child's chair lay overturned near the hearth, and a rusted kettle hung from a bent hook. "Think someone will come looking?" she asked. "Not for this place," he said. "It's been empty a long while." She ran her fingers along the windowsill. "You ever think about building a place like this?" "Not for passing through something you'd stay in." He watched her as she moved through the room. "I used to think it wasn't for me. Settling down seemed like I'd missed too much looking backward. And now?" He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Now, I can't think of anything I'd rather do." She touched his chest, fingers spread over his shirt. "You mean it." "I do." "Then let's not go back," she whispered. "Not to Elk River. Not to St. Louis. Let's find land and build something better. He leaned down, forehead resting against hers. You sure? I've never been more. The sun dipped low beyond the hills as they sat on the porch, watching the sky burn orange and gold over the ridgeline. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned against him, legs curled beneath her. A breeze stirred the dry grass, carrying the faint hum of crickets. Tomorrow, she said, we start fresh. He nodded. And this time we build it together. They spent the next morning clearing the hearth. Travis found a rusted shovel out back and used it to scrape out old ash. Evelyn gathered what drywood she could find along the fence line, careful with her steps as her ankles still bore the ache of strain. She didn't complain, didn't pause often, and when she did, it was only to steady herself against a tree or catch her breath beside the broken fence post that leaned eastward toward the wind. Travis watched her from the porch, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a thin layer of soot on his forearms. She moved with quiet purpose. There was no trace of the woman who trembled beside a fire in the woods. What he saw now was something different, someone determined to shape her own life, no matter how wild the road. When she returned with her arms full of kindling, he stepped forward and took half the load from her without a word. She handed it over, brushing a pine needle from her skirt. I saw a spring down past the gully, she said. There might be blackberries near it come summer. He nodded. If the soil's right, we could try beans or squash. Might be late in the season to start, but it's worth a shot. We'll need seeds, she said. And nails. The shutters won't last another storm. I know a man outside Livingston, he said. Runs a sawmill and trades fair. I could make the ride in 2 days if I leave at dawn. I'll stay here, she said. There's enough to keep me busy. He hesitated, eyes on the hills. You sure? She met his gaze. I know how to keep a fire going. I've got 2 hands and a rifle. He didn't argue. Instead, he stepped close and brushed his fingers along her jaw. I'll be back before the second nightfall. She leaned forward, her brow resting against his chest. Don't be late. That evening, they sat beside their fire, the hearth newly cleaned and glowing with warmth. A stew of dried venison and root vegetables simmered in the old kettle. When she tasted it, she wrinkled her nose. I think I mistook salt for flour. He took a bite and laughed, low and short. It's not bad. You're lying, she said, setting the spoon aside. He reached for her hand. I like it because you made it. She looked down at their fingers. Do you think we'll be happy here? He didn't answer right away. Then I think happiness is something you build, not something you find. And I reckon I've got the right person to build it with. She leaned into him, quiet for a time. Outside, the wind pressed gently against the shutters. Inside, the firelight danced across the walls, casting their shadows in soft, flickering shapes. You said once you used to ride with a cattle drive near Bozeman, she said. He nodded. Only 1 season. Too many men, not enough sleep. I liked the work but not the noise. Do you miss it? No, he said. What I missed was you. She swallowed, her thumb brushing over his knuckles. Maybe this is what we needed. Time apart so we could come back stronger. I don't want to lose a single day more, he said. Not when we've got all this in front of us. The next morning, Travis saddled up just as the sun broke over the ridge. Evelyn stood by the fence, hair loosely tied back, rifle slung over one shoulder. If you see any cloth bolts, she said, I could use something better than this skirt. He grinned. You want blue or red? She tilted her head. Surprise me. He leaned down and kissed her slowly, the brim of his hat brushing her brow. Then he was off, the sound of hooves fading down the trail. Evelyn watched until he disappeared into the trees. Then she turned back toward the cabin, the door creaking open as she stepped inside. It wasn't much, not yet. But it could be. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was waiting for something better, she was already holding it in her hands. Evelyn rose before first light. The cabin was cold and the fire had burned down to soft coals. She added a split log and crouched close until the flames caught. Her ankles still ached when she put weight on it, but she no longer stumbled. Outside, frost silvered the grass and a pale mist clung low near the trees. She pulled on Travis's old coat, left hanging by the door, and stepped out to feed the chickens that had wandered down from a neighboring ruin the day before. 2 hens and a mottled rooster had settled under the porch. She scattered crumbs from the last oatcake and watched them peck at the frost-hardened ground. Later, she filled the kettle and carried it to the hearth, careful not to spill. The silence was thick, broken only by the creak of the roof settling and the rustle of leaves outside. She missed his footsteps already, the solid way he moved, always sure of his direction. Still, she felt no fear. He would return. She knew it without question. She'd found a ledger in the drawer of a broken desk and now sat at the table, scribbling lists in the margins. Things they'd need come spring: oil for the lamps, seed potatoes, hinges for the barn door, a second spade. Her handwriting was uneven, the pencil worn to a stub, but the act of planning steadied her. By mid-afternoon, the wind shifted. A hawk circled above, gliding low over the ridge before vanishing from sight. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, eyes scanning the tree-line. She didn't expect him until tomorrow, but something in her stirred. A hush fell over the hills, not fear, but anticipation. Then hoofbeats slow and deliberate. She stepped off the porch, her heart surging as Travis came into view along the path. His horse moved easy beneath him, its flanks streaked with dust. Behind him, the pack mule carried a small load wrapped in canvas. He looked worn, his face shadowed from the ride, but his mouth curved faintly when he saw her. "You're early," she said, walking to meet him. "Didn't feel right stretching the road out just to sleep in a stranger's barn," he said, dismounting. "And I found what we need." He untied the bundle from the mule and handed it to her. Inside was a folded bolt of deep green calico, worn at the edges but still strong. She ran her fingers across the fabric. "I thought you'd pick blue," she said. "I did," he said, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out a second parcel, this one wrapped in paper. "But I saw this first and thought it looked like the hills out back." She didn't answer, only stepped closer and kissed his cheek, her hand resting against his chest for a moment longer than necessary. Inside, he set down the rest of the supplies: a hammered tin lantern, a coil of hemp rope, a bundle of nails wrapped in cloth, and a half-sack of seed. She watched him move, his gestures slower now, as if something in him was settling. He rolled his shoulders once, then met her eyes. "There's a man in town who'll trade a wagon bed for work. Said he needs help felling trees before snow comes." "You'll take it?" she asked. "I told him I'd start next week, if it suits you." "It suits me if it suits you." He nodded, then stepped close. "A man asked after you. Said he thought he recognized your name from the papers." Her breath caught. "Did he say where he was from?" "St. Louis," Travis said. But he wasn't looking out of concern. More like someone who'd been paid to find something that ran. Evelyn looked down, her hands curling around the edge of the table. "I should have known he wouldn't just forget. He seemed the kind to turn around quick if he thought the trail was cold." "I don't want to run anymore." "You don't have to," Travis said. "We're far enough from the rail lines, and the sheriff in Livingston doesn't ask questions he doesn't want to answer." She looked up into his face. "I want my name to be yours." He blinked once, slow and full of something that didn't need words. "You sure?" "I've been sure since the river," she said. "When you found me." They stood there, firelight warming the floor between them. Outside, the wind picked up again, rustling the eaves. "Then we'll speak to the preacher next time I ride into town," he said. "Nothing fancy, just you, me, and the land around us." She reached out and took his hand. "That's all I want." That night they ate by lantern light. He showed her how to twist rope for netting, and she taught him how to mend the tear in his shirt with a needle she'd found in the desk. They spoke not of what had been taken, but of what they'd build: rows of corn along the southern slope, a lean-to for the mule, a porch with a view of the ridgeline where the hawk circled. And when they lay down beneath the quilt, his arm around her waist, she whispered, "You didn't just come to save me, Travis. You came to bring me home." He didn't answer, only drew her closer, the quiet between them full of promise and the steady beat of something lasting. By late October, the trees behind the cabin stood bare, their branches etched like charcoal against a sky bleached pale by the season's turn. Evelyn stood at the edge of the plot Travis had cleared, her hands tucked beneath her shawl, watching the wind lift the curls of smoke from the chimney. He was down in the hollow, hauling the last of the felled pine logs toward the lean-to they'd framed with salvaged boards and a patchwork roof. She walked carefully down the slope, her boots pressing into the frost-hardened earth. When she reached him, he was tying off the mule's harness, breath steaming in the cold air. A shallow cut along his forearm had dried over, and his shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, revealing the faint dusting of sawdust that clung to his skin. "You've been out since first light," she said. "I wanted to finish before the snow sets in. Roof's next." She looked toward the frame. "It'll hold. You knew what you were doing. I learned from watching, mostly. Worked a stretch with a surveyor once outside Deer Lodge. He said if you build something with your hands, you'll remember its weight every day you live in it." She placed her hand over his. "You ever think about what comes next?" He studied her, eyes steady. "You mean after the roof?" "I mean after the ground thaws. This land, it's more than shelter now. We could stay for good." He turned toward the hills, the wind tugging at his collar. "I already decided that, the day you asked me to stay." She leaned into him, resting her cheek briefly against his shoulder. "I sent a letter to my sister, told her not to worry. Told her I'm married now and I'm happy. She'll be glad to know you're safe. And I told her we won't be coming back." Travis nodded. "There's nothing back there for you now." "I don't regret any of it," she said. "Not even the hard parts. They brought me here." That night, they sat in the half-finished lean-to watching the moon rise through the open beams above. The fire crackled low beside them and Evelyn wrapped the quilt tighter around her shoulders. Travis poured a cup of coffee from the tin pot and handed it to her. "Cora rode by 2 days ago," he said. "Said a man came through Livingston asking about a woman with dark hair and a southern accent. He didn't stay long." Evelyn didn't flinch. "He won't find me." "No," Travis said. "He won't." She took a sip, then set the cup aside. "I want to plant apple trees next spring. Just 2. One for each of us." He smiled, quiet and warm. "I'll help dig the holes." They rose early the next morning. Travis rode into Livingston to sign his name at the church registry. The preacher, a stooped man with a crooked nose and ink-stained fingers, asked no questions. Evelyn met him outside the chapel at sundown, her hand tucked beneath a shawl stitched with green thread. They said their vows with no one watching but the wind and the last leaves rattling loose from the cottonwoods. They returned home with a folded paper bearing both their names, and Travis nailed it above the hearth beside the shelf where Evelyn kept a small jar of dried lavender and a worn book of scripture. Winter came in slow and heavy, blanketing the hills in silence. They spent the long nights reading by firelight, mending what could be saved, stitching what had worn through. Evelyn learned to trap rabbits, and Travis taught her how to sharpen a blade against the whetstone he carried in his pocket since he was a boy. The cabin grew warmer with each passing day, not from the fire alone, but from the rhythm they'd made between them, quiet glances across the room, hands brushing in the dark, laughter that came without warning. By February, the lean-to held a full stack of firewood, and the pantry was lined with jars she'd filled herself. In spring, Travis built the fence that would keep the mule from wandering. He drove each post into the earth by hand. Evelyn planted seed between the rows he tilled, and when the first shoots came up, she ran to tell him, her face flushed with pride. That summer, they cleared land for a second room. He carved a handle for her spade, and she polished the brass buttons on his Sunday coat. They walked together down to the creek every evening, the path becoming so worn their footprints stayed long after they'd passed. One morning, Evelyn stood by the window, one hand resting low against her belly. "I think it's time we build a cradle," she said. Travis crossed the room, brushing a kiss against her forehead. "We'll build too." The years passed gently. The trees they planted bore fruit, and the soil answered their labor with harvest. Their children grew strong in the shadow of the mountains, learning the land as their parents had. Evelyn taught them to read and to sew. Travis taught them to ride and to listen to the wind. They remained in that valley for the rest of their days, bound not by fear or need, but by the life they shaped side by side. And every morning, before the sun cleared the ridge, Evelyn stepped out onto the porch with a shawl wrapped tight and looked over the land they had made their own. Travis would join her, calloused hand finding hers, and they would stand together in the hush of dawn, where nothing was missing and nothing waited to be chased. They had already found what they came for, and they kept it, always.